Welcome. Please take your seats. Our program will begin momentarily. Good afternoon, everyone. Please take your seats. Our program is about to begin now. Thank you, everyone. To begin our Day 2 National Leadership Luncheon and Plenary, please welcome to the stage the Honorable Nelly Godebert, former Rhode Island Secretary of State and NALEO board member, and the Honorable Brian Colon, New Mexico Commission of Public Records member and NALEO board treasurer.
Buenas tardes, everyone. Buenas tardes. Vamos, mi gente. Settle down. Yo sé que la fiesta está buena. It has been such a great conference, and you can tell from the energy in this room. And I sincerely hope that you are having a fabulous time.
Well, we are honored to be with you and the esteemed friends, colleagues, and policymakers. And we hope as you take your seat, Don Arturo is excited to see the sushi on the table. So take your seats and let's get started.
On behalf of the NALEO 40th Annual Conference, we'd like to give a special shout out to today's presidential sponsor and lunchtime plenary host, Bank of America, a longtime sponsor of NALEO. Here to provide remarks on behalf of Bank of America is Ms. Angie Garcia-Lathrop, Community Affairs Executive. Put your hands together for Ms. Garcia-Lathrop.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary, and good afternoon, buenas tardes. It's such an honor to join you at NALEO's 40th Annual Conference. A sincere thank you to Arturo Vargas and the Board of Directors for convening us here in New York City, the financial center of the world. We at Bank of America are proud to continue our decades-long partnership with NALEO, supporting your efforts to develop and advance Latino state and local leaders. This partnership is particularly important to me. My parents met for the first time at a meeting convened by former Representative Mo Udall as he was beginning his political career. And my father, one of the first Mexican-American lawyers in Tucson, Arizona, was considering his own career. While my father never took the plunge, he found his way to contribute to the Chicano movement as one of the founders of MALDEF. Thank you so much. Seeing his dedication to public service inspired my own career. After graduating law school, I moved to Washington and had an opportunity to work for the late, great chairman of the House Banking Committee, Henry B. Gonzalez of Texas. Through the experiences of my father, combined with my time on Capitol Hill, I know, like each of you know, how important it is we have a seat at the table. When we do, public policy is more equitable. When we don't, we relive, we revisit the mistakes of the past. That is why, to me, the core mission of NALEO is so critical. And I am forever grateful to have had the opportunity to connect the resources, the thought leaders of Bank of America to you over the last 15 years. At Bank of America, we recognize the power of equality and economic opportunity in the communities we serve. It's fundamental to who we are and how we win in the marketplace, and it shows in our results. Thank you so much. We're proud to be the bank of choice for Hispanic Latino clients and businesses. We serve more than 13.4 million Hispanic Latino clients, including more than 1.2 million business owners. Nearly 1 in every 3 checking accounts opened today with Bank of America are by Hispanic and Latino customers, and close to 3/4 of our financial centers have Spanish language capabilities. I just want to reiterate that. 1 in 3 accounts opened at Bank of America are opened by Latino customers. It's incredible. Our commitment can be seen internally throughout the bank as well. Nearly 20% of our U.S. workforce is Hispanic Latino, and we have over 7,000 Spanish-speaking employees serving our customers in language every day. We support the development of our team through programs including our award-winning employee network, HOLA, and our Hispanic Latino Executive Council. In fact, today, one of our co-chairs of our Hispanic Latino Executive Council, Patricia Pacheco, is with us today at the Bank of America table. I've served on the council with Patty since its founding, and with intention and focus, we have succeeded in more than doubling the number of Latino executives at Bank of America. The businesses, organizations, and government officials represented in this room, we all play a role in helping move communities forward, particularly during these times of economic uncertainty, something our plenary panel will discuss in more detail shortly. I look forward to learning and leading alongside each of you to move this work forward. Adelante.
Thank you so much, Angie. We so much appreciate our partnership with Bank of America. Could I have your attention, please, for just a minute? We have a particularly challenging acoustic situation in this ballroom. You know, ordinarily, if people share with each other at your tables, it's not an issue, but because of the low ceiling around the room, your voices actually get amplified here onto the stage. And so it's difficult for many people to actually hear the program, the plenary speaker. So I do ask for your indulgence to keep your conversations to the bare minimum during the program so that everybody can enjoy what's being said. Thank you.
Okay, ya oyeron todos. Okay. Thank you again to our plenary host, sponsor, Bank of America, and Ms. Garcia Lathrop for those remarks.
You know, when Arturo speaks, everyone listens, so thank you for following those palabras. It's so important to honor one another, and today we have an opportunity to honor the Honorable Nelly Gorbea on her birthday, so feliz cumpleaños a Nelly. You know, our organization would like to recognize an additional presidential sponsor and lunchtime plenary host, the Coca-Cola Company. They stand tall with the Hispano community, and here to provide remarks on behalf of the Coca-Cola Company is, and you're not going to believe this, imagine working for Coca-Cola and your name is Miss Zinicola. It's absolutely true. Give a big round of applause for the Director of Political Strategy and Advocacy, Miss Jennifer Zinicola.
Thank you, ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished guests. Coca-Cola, a symbol of refreshment and joy, is not just a fizzy beverage. Today, I'd like to emphasize the symbiotic relationship between Coca-Cola's success and a thriving U.S. economy. Farmers cultivating the finest ingredients, manufacturing employees crafting each bottle with precision, a well-functioning transportation sector, yes, truckers and logistics, ensures that our products reach stores, restaurants, and consumers efficiently and on time. The retail industry is another significant player in Coca-Cola's success. From small convenience stores to supermarkets, we rely on a strong retail sector to showcase and distribute our products. Importantly, Coca-Cola relies on consumer spending, a cornerstone of a robust economy. When people believe and have confidence in their financial well-being, they're more likely to indulge in the simple pleasures of life, including a refreshing Coca-Cola beverage. So let us recognize the power of collaboration as business leaders and policymakers, and the deep interplay of our decisions on the opportunities for families, individuals, businesses, and a thriving and bolstering economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We want to thank again our host sponsors for this beautiful plenary luncheon, the Bank of America and the Coca-Cola Company. Let's give them one more round of applause. Aplauso a todos. Their support for this NALEO 40th Annual Conference has truly been remarkable. Thank you again, Ms. Zinicola.
Yes, and now it is my pleasure to welcome back to the stage in a much nicer, because you're much quieter now, he's going to be much nicer. NALEO's Executive Director, CEO Arturo Vargas, and Luby Navarro, our President, to present the 2023 NALEO President's Award.
Hello again, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Treasurer Colon and Secretary Gorbea. Let's give them a round of applause. They're doing a great job. I say it's that Puerto Rican blood in them. Someone also had to, as you know, had a birthday today, and I'd like to take an honor, along with Arturo, to re-wish you a happy birthday, Nelly Gorbea. Thank you. Happy birthday, amiga. And feliz cumpleaños. The NALEO's President's Award was established in 1997 by NALEO's second president, New Mexico House Speaker Raymond G. Sanchez. It was created to recognize efforts of individuals and organizations whose work has strengthened NALEO and the NALEO Education Fund and the Latino community. This year's recipient has demonstrated the true spirit of this award.
You know, ordinarily, I would not be part of this presentation because the selection of the NALEO President's Award is made by the president of NALEO, but this particular awardee is very special to me. I'm sure she will share with you the story of how and when she and I met, but what she has done for this organization has been just extraordinary. Having served on our board of directors, having served as NALEO president, having served as chair of the NALEO Educational Fund, she has been a partner to the entire staff and to me during her service on our board. She is concluding her service on our board and will receive a token for her service, but her dedication to this institution helped us evolve and progress, and for that, the entire staff and I are truly indebted to her.
Thank you, Arturo. Before we present our recipient, I'd like to take a moment of personal privilege, and I apologize if my voice may break. It is with joy that I tell you that when I opened the first day doors of Naleo in my life. And it's been almost 8 years since I walked into Naleo. Not only was I felt welcomed by the entire staff, Arturo and his whole amazing team that we have, but I can tell you that amongst the many people that I felt the love, but most importantly, the mentorship for me as a Latina woman was the recipient of this award. You see, it takes women like this woman that is going to receive the award to lift other women in our communities. And you can never lose hope that these type of women are out there in every organization, and they come with a very kind and gentle voice. But they will hold your hand, and they will put you under their wings to lift you and help lead. And so if you see me here today as Naleo's national president, don't be mistaken if it was not for the efforts of our entire team, but this particularly recipient of this President's Award, who took me under her wing, and with her force, her love, passion, and leadership led me to become Naleo's national president and break many ceilings in my life. So it is my distinct honor to present the 2023 Naleo's Recipient Award to my mentor, mi comadre, my leader for many years here in Naleo, the Honorable Pauline Medrano, Dallas County Treasurer, Naleo's Educational Fund Chair from 2012 to 2016, and the Naleo President from 2016 to 2019. It is hard to summarize the accomplishments of such an outstanding Latinas in such a short time, but I have on stage, but I will do my best. Let's welcome the Honorable Pauline Medrano. Wait. And so bear with me as I hold my tears to present my mentor. Pauline Medrano, Treasurer Pauline Medrano is a longtime friend of Naleo and the Education Fund, but for more, she is a friend to many Latino leaders and her constituents for many years. Pauline Medrano was elected as Dallas County Treasurer in November 2014 and re-elected in 2018. Before this, beginning in 2005, she was elected 4 times to the Dallas City Council. Treasurer Medrano served as Deputy Mayor Pro Tem from 2009 to 2011, and as Mayor Pro Tem from 2011 to 2013. She has been a devoted public servant, dedicating her life to fighting her causes as a wide-reaching as public safety, accessible child care, family and well-being, and a fair and accurate census. Treasurer Medrano's work with our organization did not end with her role as Naleo President or as Naleo's Educational Fund Chair. She has consistently been an ally for all of us, volunteering her time, resources, knowledge, long after she tenured these roles for many years, and she was always a phone call away. That's not on script. But above all this, Treasurer Medrano is always a wonderful human being. She has accomplished all this and more with tremendous grace and success. Congratulations to the Honorable Pauline Medrano. As she's here on stage, we present her today with the President's 2023 Award. Congratulations.
Luby, thank you so much, Madam President, for your kind words. I'm so proud of your leadership at Naleo and the work that you do in Miami-Dade County. I recall our first meeting in Washington, D.C., and I sat there and listened to Luby talk about what she organized for the 2010 census. I quickly leaned over to Arturo and said, Luby's a keeper. Un aplauso for our president, Luby Navarro. Good afternoon, everyone. I am humbled, I am honored to receive this year's Naleo's President Award. You know, as elected officials, we all recognize that we do nothing alone. We are on shoulders of mentors, supporters, family, friends, and in my case, family, family, family. I walk into the living room, and once I do this, they quickly say, okay, what'd you get yourself into now? I said, well, I volunteered for so-and-so, and what my sister-in-law says, no problem, we're there, we'll help you, and they are. When I joined NALEO in 2005, I knew I wanted to be involved in this organization. But once I met the staff of NALEO, I was hooked. So to the staff of NALEO, you have been wonderful. No greater staff than the NALEO staff. And I think the feeling's mutual. There's not a day that goes by that I not mention NALEO. Every single day since 2005. It is important that each of us educate the people around us. If they show interest in us, they should invest in NALEO so we can duplicate our numbers. They should invest in NALEO's work in the census, immigration, our civic engagement, our making sure that we have qualified candidates and that we elect more Hispanic candidates and people that will work for our communities. My siblings and I had wonderful parents in Esperanza and Francisco Pancho Medrano. You need to look him up if you don't know him. They encouraged us to do our best, the best job you could possibly do in whatever you set out to do. Support and encourage others along the way. And whatever you do, you support the community. You support the people that brought you to the dance. You are their voice. You represent them, and they're your bosses. They entrusted this in you. My father's quote is, "From the day you're born until the day you die, you're in politics." Think about that. So why not make it better? Before I end, please allow me to introduce my family that are here to support me today. I have my brother Rolando, if you'll stand up, his wife Angela, my perfect nieces, Hope Dominique and Nicolasa Pauline, if you'll stand up. My niece, Yolanda Dominguez, and her perfect daughters, Melina and Nina. My nephew, the former Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Dallas, Adam Medrano. My good friend, but NALEO's good friend, Cheryl Richards, VP of Visit Dallas. The host of all the DFW elected officials, if y'all will stand up. City councils, county commissioners, everyone, please stand up. Thank you. I'd like to recognize Lou Moreno with Nationwide, Lori Palacios with Ramirez and Company, Maritza Kelly with PFM, Martin Cabrera with Cabrera Capital Markets, Bridget Moreno Lopez with Linebarger, and all the elected officials. Again, I am humbled, I am honored for this wonderful award, the 2023 President's Award. Again, Arturo, Erica, Luby, thank you very much for your support. Appreciate it.
Una boricua de la Isla del Encanto, un boricua de
Isla del Encanto
no,
y
la
Tierra del Encanto.
Tierra del Encanto. Son dos encantos.
Dos encantos, todos tenemos encantos. Mira, let me just say this. I stand before you as treasurer of NALEO because of that award recipient. Pauline Medrano has made a difference in my life. She has made me a better public servant, a better leader, and most importantly, a better human being. Congratulations otra vez for Treasurer Medrano, and thank you for your work in the community and beyond.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. As someone who also served on the board when she was the board chair, you learned so much from just being in the presence of Pauline Medrano. And I will forever be grateful because she taught me how to say give or get, and we got it done, and it's important. So now please, everyone, buen provecho, and be sure to stick around because we have a can't miss plenary, America's Financial Outlook in a Global Economy. Buen provecho.
Buen provecho.
Hello, everyone. Please take your seats. Our program is beginning to resume momentarily. Good afternoon, everyone. Please take your seats. Our program is about to resume. Thank you. We kindly ask that you direct your attention to the center of the stage podium. Please welcome back to the stage the Honorable Nelly Gorbea, former Rhode Island Secretary of State and NALEO board member, and the Honorable Brian Colon, New Mexico Commission of Public Records member and NALEO board treasurer.
Bueno, mi gente. Okay. We're going to give everybody a minute to settle down, find their seats. Porque si no, ya saben, regresa Arturo. So, welcome back, everyone. I'm pleased to be here to welcome to the stage this afternoon's plenary moderator, the Honorable Rafael Anchia, Texas State Representative and past NALEO Educational Fund Chair. He's going to lead our panelists in discussing America's financial outlook in a global economy.
Outstanding. And this afternoon's plenary will shine some light on the current and potential economic concerns and the effects on state and local governments that each of you lead. This discussion will also offer strategies to strengthen and improve economic resilience.
Thank you for leading us in this discussion. And now, everyone, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Rafael Anchia to the stage. Where is he? Oh, that one. It's there.
Bueno, el salón se puso bien calladito, así me gusta, así me gusta. Y como me enseñó mi mamá, cuando usted está platicando, hablando, y los demás están comiendo, les dices buen provecho. So buen provecho to all of you. My name is Rafael Anchia. I am the state representative for District 103 in Dallas County, and I know Dallas is so well represented today, including by our award recipient. I also know that many of my state representative colleagues from the state of Texas are here. I want to give them a shout out and say how proud I am to be your teammate in Texas. I also want to really encourage everybody that while you're eating to do some active listening to this panel. We are here in the financial capital of the United States to celebrate this 40th annual conference. And at the same time, we're trying to improve ourselves because that is the Naleo way. The reason you come to these events are not only for the relationships, but for the continuing education. And as new elected officials, and I know many of you are recent, maybe in your first or second terms, you have entered public service to try to improve community. I think all of us do that. And oftentimes, you end up playing ping pong in your first couple of terms, right? You have a problem that comes to you and you hit it right back. You have another problem that comes to you, you hit it right back. And maybe the abuelita down the street que te llama en tu celular porque yo te ayudé ser elegida y yo tengo perros sueltos aquí en mi comunidad, right? It may be stray dogs, it may be potholes, but you're playing ping pong back and forth in your first couple of terms. And then, so I like to call that like your undergraduate education in public service. And then you may, assuming you have a little bit of time in office, you may get sort of to that master's degree, right, of education where you are understanding how to get stuff passed, understanding government processes, understanding how your level of government works with other levels of government, and how you can get stuff done. And then we get to sort of the PhD level and understanding how externalities, including global financial markets, right? What happens here on Wall Street, what happens at the European Central Bank, what happens a world away in China impacts you and your constituents. And that's really the PhDs. Now, many of us don't come to the party with a financial services background, right? Many of us come from the law or from healthcare, right? And others come, been spending time making homes and building families. And then suddenly you're thrust into public service. So what I really appreciate, Arturo, about Naleo is that we try to short circuit that path from the BA to the MA to the doctorate degree in your public service, knowing all the while that you are oftentimes on a 2-year or 4-year election cycle. So we Latinos, our community, need you to get as highly educated on these issues as possible for our community to move ahead. And I will tell you, the plenary panel we have today is really that PhD kind of work. And I'd like to invite our panelists to come on up. These are folks that people hold their breath for, that people, in the case of B of A, pay millions of dollars to hear from in the Fortune 50 boardrooms. But Naleo is offering this to you today as part of its 40th annual conference. So with that context, with that pretext, I ask you to listen and think about, ultimately, how these macroeconomic trends, things that are happening across the world, impact you, impact your public service, and impact your constituents. So let's get going. And it is my extreme good fortune to welcome here and sit at this conference with two very well-known folks. And the first one, to my left, is Mr. Michael Gapin. He is Managing Director and Head of U.S. Economics at Bank of America, one of our underwriters today. And to his left is the Honorable Eric Van Nostrand. He is the Assistant Secretary for Economic Policy at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. So you have Janet Yellen right at the very top. You've probably seen her testifying before Congress on a regular basis in the spunky kind of way that she does. And then under her, there are 10 assistant secretaries. And Eric sits as one of them in that organization. So we're really hearing it from the top infrastructure at the Fed. And so let's just get started, right? We're in an environment of higher interest rates. Of course, we've lived some historically low interest rates for a long time. We are emerging from a COVID economy. We have very notable bank failures, right? Including some of the most revered financial institutions, global financial institutions that from one day to the next went under. We are in a low unemployment environment, a historically low unemployment environment. We are in some cases facing demographic cliffs, right? And we have a war in Europe. that is disrupting supply chains and disrupting markets. So why don't we start with you, Michael? In light of that context that I said, that's it, that's all. Help the average school board member, the average city council person, state representative, statewide elected official, separate the wheat from the chaff in that salad that I just gave you, and help them, arm them with the questions that they need to be asking so that they're making good decisions locally.
I think some of the main themes, first of all, thank you for that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and always a privilege to be with Eric in the U.S. Treasury. There's a few main themes that are percolating through the economy that are likely being felt at the local level. One of those is, we're still in the reopening phase of the pandemic, and the latter stages certainly, but during the pandemic there was incredible demand for goods that the economy had trouble supplying. Now the economy is reopening, spending is shifting back to services, and the economy is struggling to provide those services. So the massive relative shift in demand is ongoing and remains a challenge. What that's done, though, the rotation to services is bringing the U.S. economy back to its sweet spot. It's come with a tremendous amount of re-employment. In economist lingo, we say services is low productivity. What that means is you need a lot more workers to expand output. So the big challenge has been re-employing quickly in an economy that's shifting rapidly. But the good news is it's brought along a lot of employment, and, you said, brought the unemployment rate to historically low levels. Of course, the next part of that challenge, though, is but policymakers need to bring inflation down. And so I think that we're at that phase of the economy where we're kind of at the very end of getting away from COVID and having the economy, the pendulum swing back to a more normal situation. But the lingering effect here is inflation. Policymakers prepared for the worst and hope for the best. And one of those good things was rapid reemployment, but it came at the cost of higher inflation. We're pretty comfortable in thinking inflation's on its way down and will keep coming down. It'll probably take at least 12 to 24 months for that process to continue. But I'm relatively optimistic on where the economy is going and our ability to bring inflation down without doing, say, significant damage along the way.
Why are we in an inflationary environment? Eric, why don't you talk about that?
Yeah,
why do we have inflation, right?
Is it all right, Raphael, if I do that very annoying thing they do in political debates?
Yes,
where
do
you
your
ask
disclaimer.
The first question and then I give a little thank you speech and then answer your question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sounds good. I just want to say, before I get into that, and I will answer that directly, is that I spend most of my job, I suspect Mike does too, thinking a lot about the numbers, thinking a lot about those aggregate trends that you cited in your introduction, and getting excited or sometimes disappointed when we see aggregate data about the labor market coming in better or worse than expected. But what I realize I need more of in my job is recognizing that the way that those numbers really matter to people is in the way it translates to the lived experience of different communities across the United States, including underserved communities, including lower income communities, and understanding the way those numbers translate. So I want to say, before I dive into a bunch of statistics about the aggregate inflationary outlook, that the reason we think that matters is because it translates so directly to the pocketbooks of the middle class and lower income earners in the United States. And the feeling I got over the past 45 minutes as this event kicked off and watching some of the speeches at the awards, I was just blown away by the passion and enthusiasm in this room for the work that you all do. So I want to thank you for that. And I'll do my best to connect that to some of the numbers a little bit. On the inflationary outlook in particular, it's certainly true. I agree with Michael's bottom line that as one consequence of the very robust and resilient reopening we have seen since the pandemic in the United States, we are facing faster cost increases than we are used to in the past couple decades in the United States. Part of that is because we've been so resilient on the growth front. We've seen really persistent upside surprises in the strength of our labor market, the unemployment rate holding at historically low levels. Importantly, below that, you don't even see this in the unemployment rate, but more and more people are coming into the labor force. The participation rate for prime age workers, so the share of 25 to 55-year-olds in America who are either working or looking for a job, engaged with the labor market, is higher than it's been since the pandemic. If you look just at women, it's the highest it's been ever. And I think bringing a lot of folks who have historically been a little more distant from the labor market in is really an important win of the way the United States has recovered over the past couple of years. But yes, to your point, it has come with inflation. We share Michael's view that we feel good about the outlook, and we continue to see a path, as Secretary Yellen has said in many forums, for inflation to come down without triggering, the sort of damage that is typically associated with a quick reduction in inflation. The jury's still out on that, and risks are still there, but we do believe we are on that path of managing those well. We got some great news on inflation this morning, not to make too much of one data point, but importantly this morning we saw core inflation outside of the energy sector and the food sector, that's been a little bit stickier, that's been kind of staying high over the past couple of years. We saw that make important progress come down with new data that came out in June, and we're optimistic that that's going to continue.
Okay, so inflationary pressure and a potential recessionary environment impacts different communities in different ways, right? And different sectors in different ways. So some might argue that with credit tightening, for example, the dislocation in credit markets, that commercial real estate, by way of example, or office real estate is already in somewhat of recession. Can you talk to the crowd about, because when we hear that the U.S. is in recession, we think that, oh, it's hitting everybody evenly across the board and across every sector in the same way. Can you distinguish how a recession may hit Rhode Island differently than Texas, may hit commercial real estate differently than the automotive sector? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the recession, or the R word, is a totally loaded word in economic lingo. And I would say that the Fed is trying to bring inflation down by what they would say bringing demand more in line with supply. So in this case, you do have to moderate demand. Typically, the way that happens is, like you said, the economy isn't sensitive to changes in interest rates in the same way at the same time in all sectors. So housing tends to go first. That slowed down very strongly last year. Some parts of business spending, business makes long-term investment spending decisions. Some of that is in the commercial real estate sector, as you mentioned. That tends to slow down quickly, and it did. Again, manufacturing production, when households need to buy cars, they often do it on credit. Household furnishings or appliances is often done on credit. So the durable side of the economy tends to slow down. All of these things happened last year. And you could argue maybe have found a bottom and are starting to turn in some ways. But 70% of U.S. economic activity is consumer spending. Let's call it roughly 2/3 of that is around services. So defined recessions, meaning the economy writ large is in recessions, is kind of about that question. Does consumer spending slow down in a way where maybe we get some job losses and a backup in the unemployment rate? And the National Bureau of Economic Research, who is the arbiter of whether or not that constitutes a recession or not, would decide, yes, that indeed was a recession. But you're right. Some sectors of the economy either are in now or were last year, but the economy as a whole is not. It's just that monetary policy, to use Chairman Powell's language, works with long and variable lags. It hits different parts of the economy in different ways with different strength at different times. And we're just seeing that play out. So I would say the moderation in growth is happening. Consumer spending is slowing down. Again, the goal is to bring inflation down. The flip side of this is inflation affects almost everybody equally. Obviously, it depends on income levels. But you're kind of trading off, evils here. How much can we moderate demand and avoid doing undue harm to the economy while at the same time we bring inflation down? Just one last point. The reason we do that is because we think the long-run performance of the economy is best when inflation is low and stable, and everybody in this room is not talking about it. When you're planning your budgets, when you're planning your spending decisions, when you're making your political outlook. Inflation having that taken off the table is a major benefit. So the real policy error isn't, in my mind, whether or not we get something that qualifies as a recession, a small recession in the next 12 months. It's, do we have the wherewithal to bring inflation down to 2%, keep it stable, and basically take it off the table as a point of discussion. If we do, I think the long-run performance of the economy, everybody benefits from that.
So you mentioned budgets. We have people who are appropriators in this room. We have folks who have to raise money on various ways and means committees. They have to raise revenue in order to budget. Inflation means things cost more, right? Labor, component goods, right? Things cost more. So prior budgets may not have been reflective of what things cost today. Right? That's one way that you have a very immediate impact on the people in this room. The other sort of important thing is interest rates, right? Because we fund a lot of our infrastructure using long-term debt, interest rates are very, very important about when we go out to the market. And I know Martin Cabrera is in this room, but like when we go out to the market and offer up long-term debt, issue long-term debt, interest rates are very important there. We were in a historically low interest rate environment, right? For the longest time. People knew that because they locked in their mortgage at, fill in the blank, 3%, 4%, and so their long-term consumer debt is locked in at a low level. For policymakers, where do you anticipate interest rates going for their long-term planning? Right? Are we ever going to get back to those historically low interest rates? Should we be at those historically low interest rates? Or are we going to land somewhere else?
So let me start with a bit of an annoying answer that you'll always get when you ask the Treasury Department about interest rates, which is that it is the purview of the Federal Reserve. And because
I think I said Fed earlier. What I meant was Treasury. I apologize.
That was an exciting promotion you gave me, but I have to decline it, I'm afraid. But it is the Fed's principal. They are the leaders of setting monetary policy and interest rate policy in the United States. So I can't comment too much on that other than to say that I very much agree that that is one of the principal transmission mechanisms by which economic policy is hitting consumer pocketbooks today. We're seeing that translate to mortgage rates. We're seeing that translate to small business loans and other methods of financing that you all use to start business and invest. Again, that's something that's happening in parallel with this inflationary dynamic. And I want to highlight one thing there that is important but hasn't come up in our conversation yet, which is when we talk about inflation, we focus principally on the increases of the costs that we consumers face. And that's the most important thing to focus on, and that's why it's a problem. But encouragingly, at the same time that the labor market's being so resilient, we're also seeing encouraging progress in wage growth, in incomes going up. And again, at an aggregate level, when I kind of start my day focused on the aggregate numbers, there's a lot to be optimistic about. As of this morning's inflation data, real earnings after wages at an aggregate level, have grown over the past year, and that they've grown faster than inflation, and that's a good outcome for consumers in the aggregate. But the thing I want to emphasize is we are very much aware that even when that aggregate number is looking good, that doesn't mean our job is done. There remain very meaningful disparities across different communities, across different sectors of the economy, in how quickly we're climbing out of the pandemic hole. The encouraging news is that most of those groups are making good directional progress, but not nearly enough to outweigh some of those disparities that began. And that's something we remain very focused on at Treasury and in the administration in general.
So my bad for asking the Treasury guy about interest rates. Can you take on that question? Where do you think we land? Do we get back to where we were? Do we?
You promote me in the process?
Yeah. All right, Fed chair. No, seriously, where do you think we end up as people are thinking about doing their long-range planning? Do you work with your financial advisor today to issue long-term debt, to invest in infrastructure, or should we be waiting over the course of a year, 2 years? Where do we think things are headed?
So if a baseline is like prior to COVID, the Fed's what they would call a neutral rate of interest, the interest that neither kind of contracted or promoted activity, was somewhere around 2%, and a 10-year Treasury yield was trading at, let's say, roughly 2.5 average over time. I do think that there's reason to believe post-pandemic there's a slightly higher reset, meaning underlying inflation may be running a little bit higher now than it did in the past. The neutral rate of interest could be closer to maybe somewhere between 250, 275, and maybe the 10-year at around 350, 3.25 to 3.5 would be normal. So the 10-year actually roughly where it is now is consistent with inflation coming down, being low and stable, and the Fed gaining success. The front end rate, obviously, their policy rate as of this morning is within the range of 5 to 5.25. It's likely to go a little higher from here, 25, 50 basis points higher. And then as inflation comes down, the Fed can start cutting. So the big move, the answer is it depends if you're borrowing short term, tying your borrowing to interest rates in, say, the 2 to 5 year sector. There you may want to wait if you can, because rates will likely be lower in the future. But longer term rates, I think, are roughly about where they're going to be coming out of this. So slightly higher rates, but still low, I think, vis-a-vis long run averages.
When I travel around the state of Texas, and just for perspective, the state of Texas now is the 8th largest economy in the world. We just moved ahead of Italy. And I just got back from Italy not long ago, and I can see why. I mean, they live so well there. They're drinking wine all the time. They're eating pasta. Nobody wants to work. No, honestly,
I just bought a ticket to Italy.
It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
I'm just about to.
And so, no, but their real big challenge is their demographic cliff. They're running out of Italians. They're running out of people, right? And we have those challenges. We have human capital challenges in the U.S. as well. In the state of Texas, by way of example, there is only one worker available to apply for every 2 positions that are available, right? Can you talk about those pressures? Can you talk about those pressures in the United States? Because we have a very tight labor supply, despite the fact that a lot of people have moved into the labor force, and more women, by way of example, than ever before.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one where, again, to go back to that link between the aggregate numbers and Americans' lived experience, where there's, I think some consistency, which is the story's pretty clearly that since the pandemic in particular, we've made really important strides on this front. We've brought a lot more people back into the labor force. I mentioned that important statistic about women's labor force participation being as high as it ever has been. While aggregate labor force participation for prime age workers, setting aside retirees and such, is higher than it was before the pandemic. So the change here is really positive. It's what's keeping that labor supply tight, as you say. But if we're going to continue growing fast, to Michael's earlier point about productivity, we need to find ways to continue increasing that labor supply. And despite the progress that's been made in the past couple years, there are a lot of areas where we have more work to do to bring more Americans into the labor force. One, important point that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and that is often counterintuitive to folks given some of the broader equity narratives we think about, a lot of the weakness in labor force participation over the past couple years has been particularly concentrated in men. We've seen a structural decline in male labor force participation over the past couple decades. And economists don't really have a super clear explanation of that. There are a lot of candidate explanations, but none of them seem quite big enough to explain it. So it's a bit of a puzzle. And it's something that, the administration generally is focused on thinking about how can we, keep young men in particular more engaged in the labor force, because it's emerging as a problem that's really holding us back.
Editorial point here. Come on, guys. We Latinos estamos bien flojitos ahora. If it wasn't for, Latinos are literally going to save our entire community. For real. For real. Every CEO in the state of Texas that I talk to says that human capital is their biggest challenge, right? What are some of the things as policymakers we can be doing to invest money and achieve a high rate of return on our investment in developing that human capital? And I know you're not a policymaker, but you do study how markets work, how economies work. What would be some just very high-level advice you could give to this group on human capital and workforce?
Well, I'll give one example that I think, as you mentioned, it's counterintuitive. The narrative would be the more, say, benefits, government benefits you provide, the more disincentive to work that results in. And Eric doesn't know I'm going to say this, so I hope you can take this back up the chain, and hopefully it'll be well received. If there was, at the end of the last expansion, participation was actually rising, and it was against everybody's, expectation. Why is this happening? And I said, I bet we can prove that the Affordable Care Act is actually improving participation. And so, public sector solutions where you get more people insured, you get them better health care, you get better health outcomes, you provide ways to detach the provision of health care from a job, actually leads to people who were attached to the workforce longer could get back into the workforce and stay in the workforce, and I think it provided for better matching. So we actually found that states that adopted and passed the Affordable Care Act had rates of labor force participation that were 0.7% higher than states that didn't. That's a very political statement. It's borne by facts.
Is that a material number? Would you consider that material?
Millions of people.
Millions of people.
So I wanted to say that because he probably can't. But statistically speaking, you can show that the right designed and well-targeted public policy programs can, where you think, oh, you give out benefits, people aren't going to work, you actually can encourage participation. So this would be things like pre-K. This would be things like daycare. This would be things like the Affordable Care Act. Anything that makes it easier on the margin for workers to participate in the workforce can unlock the talent that we already have. Wasn't a direct answer to your question, but given who I'm sitting next to in the audience, I think it's an important statement to make.
Do you mind if I comment on that? Because I think it's super important. I enthusiastically agree with that. And the point I want to make, and this is one of the key takeaways I want to leave you with, is the general version of that point, which is I think how we need to think about government investment in our economy generally needs to change. Secretary Yellen talks about an economic policy framework that she calls modern supply-side economics. And it's really a kind of general framework for understanding the example Michael just gave, as well as a lot of other venues in which government investments can expand the productive capacity of the economy. This is supply side in the sense that we're not just giving people money to spend today. It's not about stoking demand, but it's about making investments in our economy's long-run ability to produce. And there's an old narrative over the past couple decades that if the government's spending money, that's crowding out private investment and not doing anything to increase that long-run growth. And the word supply side tends to kind of invoke...
Scary.
Yes,
right.
It tends to say, government, get out of here.
Right.
But this idea of modern supply-side economics recognizes the general point that Michael just made, that by investing in our productive capacity in the long run, we can lead to better growth outcomes at the same time that we're achieving important social goals with policies that address equity generally, with policies that address climate change, the sort of things that often get attacked as being anti-growth. Those sorts of things, we believe, are actually associated with higher long-run growth in equilibrium. And I think changing that economic narrative is a big part of the administration's economic goal, and we're very keen to engage with all of you on that going forward.
So let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about markets generally. I know that when I first came into public service, I didn't understand markets, whether markets were good or bad. And as it turns out, they're neither good nor bad. Markets are amoral, right? Not immoral, amoral, right? And markets respond efficiently to the values that you as elected officials place on them, right? And that can be in the form of market signals, things that you want the market to react to. They could be in the form of guardrails. Anybody from Texas, we've heard guardrails for the last 6 months in legislative session, but they can be guardrails that you place on them. What those guardrails are the human values that you as elected officials provide to the market to incent it to act in a certain way, right? Talk to me a little bit about how markets can operate most efficiently, and we want them to create the type of growth, economic growth that both of you are talking about, and what sort of incentives or values that we as elected officials can project on these markets to have them produce outcomes for our constituents that are accretive, right? Not the actual policies themselves, but the tools that we can use. Does anybody, and that might have been an entirely too obtuse question, but I think what you get what I'm trying to drive at.
So the way that I would look at that, I'm going to answer it broadly, is to say, I think as a policymaker, you face kind of a trade-off between what I'll call the pre-0809 world was, where you take more of a hands-off approach and let financial markets do what financial markets are going to do. You may get periods of very fast growth as a result of that, but you may get instability with that. On the other side, you could really regulate markets a lot and tell them a lot of things that they cannot do. You'll likely get lower average growth rates out of that and less volatility. So there's kind of what I'll call this balance between stability of markets in the financial sector and the economic outcomes you're trying to achieve. And I think pre-0809, we were tilted in the direction of kind of letting markets and market participants probably take too much risk. And ex post, the safety of the system wasn't well safeguarded. I think we've changed that. And now we're probably in the process of fine-tuning it. Whereas you mentioned in the introduction, we've had a few banks that have failed. And what did you notice about the argument in front of Congress as well? The regulatory curtain kind of stopped at banks that had 250 billion assets or more. Maybe that should be taken down to 100 billion. Okay, that's a very different argument than, wow, every player in the system is taking a lot more risk than we want it to. So I think the pendulum has swung in a direction where I think we have the balance better, meaning to balance growth outcomes, macroeconomic outcomes, but hopefully avoiding some of the wild swings and the systemic risk that were a big problem in 0809. So for me, that's kind of the balance. A capitalistic type of system needs to let free market enterprise and capital markets work, because we do think in the end those are more efficient. But guardrails are important, and when we always have to decide, do we need those wider or do we need those more narrow?
Anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I agree with those broad themes. The point I'd make is, we think markets are very important tools. There are a lot of very good examples of markets solving big economic problems. We talked a little bit about the global outlook. The introduction of market reforms in China lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And that's going to look historically like one of the great global economic policy achievements of the century. But the guardrails are necessary because, to your point about the amorality, they're not solving for our social goals, they're solving for efficiency. Efficiency is good and important and helpful, but it's not the only thing. And that's what this modern supply-side economics framework is about. It's about recognizing efficiency as a virtue and growth as a virtue, and identifying those policies and steps that we can take as a country where the social goals and economic growth are not inconsistent, but actually feed off one another and cut in the same direction. And that's kind of a unifying principle we think about a lot of the big investments that the Biden administration has made in the past couple years, using markets, but doing so smartly.
So we just have a few minutes left. I want to pivot to something because we're the news across the globe about severe weather and lack of resiliency in certain parts of the United States and across the world are garnering a lot of headlines. The way that the changing climate, the and I just want to be very neutral here because I'm sure there are a lot of perspectives on this here, but the way that severe weather is increasing, the El Nino phenomenon is becoming more acute and severe, and we're seeing that manifest itself in different ways across geographies through the globe. But even for people that are skeptical of the laws of thermodynamics, it doesn't pass the eye test for most people. Even if you quibble about why it's happening, you can see that it is happening in real time, and it's scary for a lot of people. And one of the things that this room is going to have to deal with is a positive social goal, I think, which is stewardship of the earth, preservation of our species, which two minor goals. But in an environment of limited resources where you have to also make investments in human capital, an infrastructure of opportunity, and climate resiliency against severe weather, what does that pivot look like for the people in this room? Why don't you take that one?
Yeah, so I might sound a little bit of a broken record on this link between growth and our social goals, but I think it's really important. It's central to the answer to that question. There's a narrative that I think, frankly, is a little silly on climate change over the past 20 years, that we have to make this choice between growing our economy and protecting it against ecological catastrophe, right? That never made much sense to me. If the sea level in New York City is rising 6 feet, there's going to be a growth problem. Solving these two goals together is very much linked. And we are looking for a set of climate change policies that are, conducive to growing our economy in the long run in a healthy way. You've seen a lot of that in the investments we made in the Inflation Reduction Act last year, which is really designed to encourage and incentivize American companies to invest more in long-term green technologies that are both good for our long-term productivity growth, addressing that problem of slower productivity that we're seeing across the developed world, while also staving off this challenge. And you're absolutely right that needs to be a bigger part of the conversation than it already is. The point I want to leave you with is we don't think it's some choice we need to make to reduce growth to achieve that. We think those two goals go hand in hand.
As you're thinking about climate, the bank, I'm sure, is studying it very, very closely. Are you able to share some of the bank's thoughts on climate mitigation, severe weather mitigation, and investment in the future?
So I personally know I'm not involved in those discussions, so I don't really have anything to share on that, unfortunately. But I would say I actually think leadership on this issue does have to come from people in this room in the public sector. It's the classic externality problem. The things that we're doing as individuals are creating a problem for everyone. And so there has to be a partnership between the public sector and the private sector to address this. And we haven't done this well over the past 40 years in the US. We were told government is the problem, not the solution. Again, not to be political. But I think the answer will involve closer public-private relationships, what the IMF would call a public-private partnership, which I do think things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and other programs are starting to move us in the direction of greater coordination between the public sector at the state, local, and federal level and activities in the private sector. So I just think that people in this room don't wait for the private sector to react. I think you have to be proactive.
And by externalities, what we're just so everybody's on the same page, what we're talking about is when your activity creates externalities, whether it's pollution or the release of carbon, those challenges or those externalities are oftentimes socialized among our constituents. Profits are privatized, right? And a price is not placed on those externalities, right? So the burning of fossil fuels releases methane, releases carbon into the environment. We don't price that in many of our states, and certainly not in Texas. It's verboten. But those have an impact not only across our state, our country, but globally, right? And it is us as policymakers that need to think through how we're going to price that socialization of harms for the good of our species and our Earth, and then create a market, a carbon, for example, market that the private sector can react to, right, and creates opportunities for them as long as the incentives are aligned, right? As long as we align those incentives. So coming up on the end, I know that our hosts are coming up to the stage. Any final words for elected officials from across the country? This is the intelligentsia of the Latino elected class throughout the country, and I say that with all seriousness. You are the people in the rooms where it happens. Anything you'd like to leave this crowd with?
I'd like to start with just a word of thanks for this engagement, because engagements like this are really what makes sure that, what can ensure that the economic conversation that we have in Washington doesn't get too far disconnected from the economic conversation in communities around the country. We're looking for a lot of different ways to continue engaging with you all in a number of different forums we're going to be hosting over the year to come. And I very much look forward to keeping in touch with some of the wonderful leaders I met around the room today.
I would echo those remarks. First of all, thank you for having us here and allowing us to share our views. We are also partners with you in many ventures at Bank of America, and if the resources we have, the research we provide, the knowledge we have may be helpful for you in coming to some of your decisions and advocacies on certain policies, I would say let us know. We're partners to you just from different sides of things. But thank you very much for letting us come and talk to you today.
Before we invite Nelly and Brian back up, let's give our panelists a big warm round of applause. Thank you.
Qué bárbaro. I didn't know we had our own otra boricua, Giraldo Rivera por Naleo. How about for Rafael Anchia? Honorable. Thank you to our moderator, the Honorable Rafael Anchia, and to our panelists, Mr. Michael Gapin and Acting Assistant Secretary Eric Van Nostrand. Additional thanks otra vez for the ones that make this luncheon possible, that make everything possible to keep our registration fees affordable por la gente, and that's Bank of America and the Coca-Cola Company. Let's give them all a round of applause. You know, and on break, I got to say this, that, our recipient of the Presidential Award, so many people walked up to me and said, "No, I love Pauline more than you do." Que bárbaro. How about all that love in the room for somebody who deserves it so much? So congratulations once again to the Honorable Pauline Medrano on receiving the Naleo President's Award.
Bueno, before we wrap up, just a few quick reminders. First of all, congratulations on completing 600 health and hygiene kits in record-breaking time during the Naleo Service Project. These kits are going to benefit the Violence Intervention Program. Ahora sí, aplauso a todos ustedes. And while the kits are already complete and will be going to help Latina victims of domestic and sexual violence across New York City to safety, we still encourage you to head to the Service Project Tower and fill out a Post-it note in the name of a Latina who has inspired you. Stick it to the corresponding panel of the Service Tower so we can all reflect on the important women in our lives. You also can't miss visiting our exhibitors and sponsors in the Naleo Bodega, located on this 6th floor. Great conversations to be had, a few trinkets and tchotchkes that you can bring to the kids. But definitely go and do that. And finally, don't miss our afternoon plenary. Latinos hold the key to solving the housing crisis. It's going to be from 2 to 3 p.m. in the Astor Ballroom on the 7th floor. And this discussion is going to be really important because it's going to address the nation's housing crisis through the lens of following the flow of capital from U.S. Latinos to the nation's largest pension funds, and how these funds are invested in private equity, real estate, and the stock market. These hard-earned funds seldom make it back to the hands of growing Latino businesses, and they're not making it into our undercapitalized communities. So this is going to be an eye-opening panel discussion, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Enjoy your second afternoon at the NALEO 40th Annual Conference. Brian.
¡Que viva Naleo!
¡Que viva!